So I want to get kind of bigger picture because I have heard you. I think obviously you have a philosophical bent, and I have heard you talk about psychopaths. And I don't know if you mean the people who are trying to run the world or people who maybe you may be vulnerable to if you don't pursue privacy. What do you mean by that?
Well, let me ask you this, Monica. Could you define a psychopath if I asked you? What do you think a
Well, I could
psychopath is?
try. I
Go
feel
ahead.
like if I recall correctly, I think maybe it's a sociopath, but someone who basically does not have a conscience.
Right, exactly. Yes. So my understanding is that a psychopath and a sociopath are the same, and
Yeah.
that's information that I get from a really fascinating book, which is a serious red pill book called "Without Conscience: The Disturbing World of Psychopaths Among Us" by
Wow.
Robert Hare. Now that is a spine-chilling book. That's what started me. That's what started me along this path of investigating psychopaths. So a psychopath is, you're right, or a sociopath is somebody who um, it seems for reasons of biology, does not have a conscience, right? Does not have the ability to have empathy. Now you say, okay, well, that's bad, but how bad is that? Well, you can't have the non aggression principle if you don't have empathy, because you can't imagine somebody else who has rights and interests and
Right.
values. You can't have the golden rule if you don't have empathy. You can't have the social contract. You can't have any of these things. Psychopaths, and there's another lady who wrote a book called The Sociopath Next Door,
Yes, yes,
Martha
I've seen
Stout.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she says that in her language, let's see here, that a psychopath has altered processing of emotional stimuli at the level of the cerebral cortex. In other words,
Mm.
this is a biological phenomenon. There have been empirical studies that have showed that psychopaths, compared to normal people, do not associate emotional words, um, do not have a different sense of emotional words compared to regular words. Um, Sorry, that was a little bit confusing. So, when going through different words, the emotional words are supposed to spark something in normal people, and they do. But with psychopaths, that's not the case. They also did a study where they lined people up to administer a shock, and the regular people, in anticipation, their heart rate went up, all this kind of stuff. For psychopaths, nothing. There was no change. So these are biologically different creatures wearing human faces. I'm intended to think, if one were to think theologically, that these are not actually, these people do not have souls,
Wow.
is how I would put it. And their interest, Monica, is exploiting people, in power, in harming people, because that's the only enjoyment. When you don't have conscience,
Wow.
when you don't have empathy, that's the only thing left, is the ascent to power. So it makes sense that while psychopaths are about 2% of the population, which is pretty
That's a lot
shockingly
of
high.
people.
Yeah, you go into your local Safeway and there's a psychopath in there. Um,
Jeez.
uh, but
Right. That's
but
one in
so
50 people.
right, so 2%, but they contribute to 50% of serious crimes.
Hmm.
So now here's the thing, Monica.
Now,
Psychopaths.
how did would you know that? How are they diagnosed with that? I'm curious because you do seem to
Well,
have
yes.
past at
Well,
your
these
fingertips.
are statistics that I've gathered from the books that I've described.
Right. Okay.
And so they've run these tests. I guess I
Yeah.
trust them to that extent.
Yeah.
But and they, a huge percentage of the prison population is psychopaths. So if you want to study
Right. Okay.
psychopaths,
Yes. That would be a
you end up in
way.
prison.
Yeah.
But okay, so the big picture here. So if that is who you are, you're a psychopath. Your interest is in power, control. There's some interesting kind of theorizing about the psychopathic mind. They're endlessly bored, right? They're endlessly bored. They need stimulation. They tend to go after drugs and violence and sex and all these kind of things. But they also end up in corporations. They also end up in government, because these are natural places for their personalities.
Yeah.
And think about this. We applaud people sometimes for making that tough decision, right? Somebody had to make the decision to drop the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, right? We have to put aside the emotional stuff and make the decision. Or, yeah, other kind of situations. Now, I'm not saying that the people who did that specific thing were psychopaths, but you can see all kinds of examples. Now, I don't know if Hitler was a psychopath, but I believe that the people immediately underneath them, Himmler and such, probably were. Stalin, may have been a psychopath. These are people who, when they're in positions of power, can contribute to the alteration of history.